My name's Kitty Cole, and I was born in Georgetown, Delaware. And the date was July 7, 1923. It's a long time ago.
Yeah. And can you tell me a little bit how your parents came to the area?
Well, my father lived in Georgetown. He was raised in Georgetown, and my mother was born in Snow Hill, Maryland. And when she came to Georgetown to visit her sister, she met my father. And eventually they were married. And I was born in Georgetown, and he worked on the railroad, the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Mm-hmm.
So from there we moved to Harrington when I was about 1. And I lived there for 13 years until I was 13. Then my mother and father bought a place in Rehoboth. And we moved to Rehoboth, and I went to high school in Rehoboth.
And before you go on, could I just ask you to give us the names of your father and mother?
Mm-hmm. My father's name's George W. Toppin. That's spelled Toppin. And my mother is, this is kind of strange, my mother's first name is Charles. And my father always called her Charlie, but it was Charles Elizabeth. Williams was her maiden name. And what else did you like?
That just what their names were.
Yeah. The last name was Toppin.
Mm-hmm. But I interrupted, and you said you had lived in Harrington until you were about 13.
Mm-hmm. And I loved Harrington. And when I moved to Rehoboth, it was quite a difference because there was very few people living here then. Mm-hmm. And most everything was just small cottages.
And where did you move to originally in Rehoboth?
Lived on Rehoboth Avenue, where the new Wilmington Trust Bank is where my mother's house was. Mm-hmm. Of course, they moved it off several years ago. And I lived there till after I finished high school. And I was married in Rehoboth, in the Methodist Church on Baltimore Avenue. And during the war, when World War II, I was, I think, in the 11th grade, 1941. And my husband, Charlie, had just graduated from college when I graduated from high school. So about 2 weeks after we were married, he was transferred to Cincinnati during the war because DuPont, he worked for the DuPont company, mm-hmm. and they had an ammunition plant near Cincinnati. So we lived there for 2 years during the war.
Oh.
But then we came back, and I said I'd never leave Rehoboth again.
All right. Let me back up a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
How about, tell me what it was like, your first family memories or first memories of Rehoboth and what it was like, if you could describe it as a young person.
When we first moved here, and I was 13, almost 14, we're so few, because there was no Bay Bridge, and there wasn't a ferry to Lewis and Cape May, and there was not a tunnel in Norfolk, so we really didn't have a lot of people, except mm-hmm. mostly Wilmington and local people. And so I thought it was really too quiet. Harrington was a lot livelier than Rehoboth at that time. But after I got in school and had a lot of friends, and I changed. I was very happy in Rehoboth, and my husband was a lifeguard when I met him in the summers after he got out of. Well, I guess when he was in college, but the first summer I met him, he was still a lifeguard, but he had graduated, and we went. I guess we dated about 2 years before I got married.
Well, tell me some of the things that you did that were fun in the summer.
Oh, well, I went to the way too much beach, and a lot of times we would be supposed to be in school. We'd be on the beach real early, May, April, trying to get
playing hooky,
trying to get real brown. Yeah. But well, we had so many. There were lots of nightclubs and dance halls in town. There were 3 large ones. One was called the Del Rio, and one was called the Pink Pony in Cabana. And then there was another one called the Riptide, and all 3 were right in the circle. And as young people, we loved to dance, and they had big bands in those days. And there was a place called Snyder's where all the young teenagers hung out. Everybody went to Snyder's. And there was I'm trying to think, there were railroad tracks in the middle of town at that time, and the trains, they didn't use them as a train anymore, but they did have a station was next to Snyder's. There was a railroad station and then a pool hall, and then this, it was just so different. A lot of cottages, even in the main,
Right
around
on.
the circle there were cottages.
Oh my gosh.
Dr. Beebe, his father had a doctor's office on the main circle, and Farmer's Bank, and I'm trying to think, there were many small cottages. So
Right on the main street.
right on the main street, and when we'd go out after some of the nights, they would stand, there was a place where everybody would go after hours, and they'd be all over the circle, all in the main, standing in the middle of the road, nobody cared. And we did have a good time. Rehoboth was a special place to live.
Tell me about the high school.
Well, I went to the high school where City Hall, Convention Hall,
Mm-hmm.
and it was pretty old then. The steps were all wooden and worn, but I went to school there about 2 years, and then the new school was built over where near Country Club Estates. By the way, Country Club Estates was a big golf course then, and the country club had the clubhouse there. And it backed up to my mother's house, so when I went to school every day, I walked across the golf course to go to to the new school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so open and so nice then, there were not, it wasn't developed like it is now.
But you were telling us some of the fun things that you did while in school and when you were dating. Any other things come to mind?
Well, when I was in high school, I think my first boyfriend was, his name was Gilbert Conan, and he was quite a basketball player. And we had our basketball was played over the, I think, where the Shell Center is, the basketball, we had none at the school, it wasn't large enough, so they used a building that was near the Shell shop on Rehoboth Avenue.
Okay.
And
in the middle of the
they
second
played
block
basketball on the
north
second
side.
floor of that building. And later, after that, it was also used for a skating rink.
Oh my gosh. Roller
And-
skating rink.
And then on the boardwalk where Dolly's is now, they had a bowling alley that was the small duck pins, it wasn't the large. But it was very popular, and all the girls liked the boys that worked. They had boys in that set up the pins. They weren't automatic. And everybody, all the girls would like to go in, so it was either the boys that were setting up the pins in the bowling alley or the lifeguards. All the girls were. And our beach, we had a pier. It has been broken, but destroyed, but half a part of it was still there, and a bathhouse.
Uh-huh.
They were underneath the boardwalk, right at the end of the circle. And I can remember the pier, especially because when you'd walk the beach, you'd have to kind of walk under, and they also had swings and chairs. There was a long canopy, and they had these swings that you could rent and sit on the beach and sort of sit in a swing.
Is that right?
Uh-huh.
I hadn't heard about that.
No, not many people remember that. And they also had something I really remember on Main Street. They had a place where they made their chocolate-covered popsicles with a machine. And it'd start out with a stick, and it would pick up the cherry, and then dip it in the ice cream and cover it with chocolate, and you could stand there and watch them make that.
And do you remember what store or where this store
Yes, that was
located?
located right, we're just about where Louis Pizza
Oh, okay.
parlor is now. It's about, Dolly's is on the corner of the boardwalk, and if you just come back from that, it was a real nice jewelry store and gift shop called the Bayberry Gift Shop.
Oh, okay.
And then came, excuse me, well, there was a restaurant there for a while, and then came the popsicle place, and then there was a little drugstore with a Dr. Messick's drugstore. When I was about 15, I worked one summer there, but it was just for the summer. And then next to that was a large dance hall. That was called the Del Rio.
Oh, that's where the Del Rio was.
And then after that came the Blue Hen Theater.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Carlton's men's or Carlton stores.
Oh, okay.
And after that was Farmers Bank, and then Dr. Beebe's office, and just it's so different.
You have a great memory. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a good memory. I think I've walked the boardwalk probably more than anybody in the state.
Oh.
But and we did. There was the Bellhaven was when I first came here. The Bellhaven was very popular,
Mm-hmm.
and it had a lot of rockers on the porch. And they had in the afternoons they had music and dancing. And that was the first summer I remember. I don't think it lasted very long after that, but I remember this, that when I first moved here, you'd have friends that were all ages. I mean, when I left Harrington, all my friends were the same school grade and so forth. But when I moved to Rehoboth, there were so few. The young ones and the old ones, we all sort of went around together because there weren't very many people.
Yeah.
And like I said, after school, everybody would go to the Snyder's, and in the evening you'd go back again.
Right.
And sit all night on one Coca-Cola for a nickel.
That's funny.
But it was popular, and they had a Nickelodeon, and we'd dance and jitterbug. And I do remember that at the dance halls, I mean, they used to have jitterbug. In the summer, they would have contests.
Huh.
And I can remember that because I did like to dance,
And you participated
plenty of
in
that,
some
yeah.
of these? What about the Henlopen? You mentioned the Bellhaven. What do you remember having memories about
the Henlopen had a place called the Pines Room,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody Saturday nights it was packed. It was very popular, and it was very nice. I mean, the white tablecloths, and they'd have dinners, I think, in the evening. But then after a certain hour, like 8, they would have dancing, and the band was called Sammy Farrow.
Oh, okay.
And he
So
was
you
so he was a jolly person. Everybody liked Sammy. And I do remember when I got married, it was sort of I had talked a lot about it, but the night after we got married at the church, we went down there, and when he told everybody we'd just gotten married, nobody believed it.
Oh.
We talked about it so much it didn't, but
And
it was kind of, it was a very popular place. Everybody liked the Pines.
Mhm.
And we had we still do, I guess, a record for the beach patrol. We had very few drownings or anything. They had a record of the patrol, safety.
Outstanding record.
My husband I think he was a lifeguard for about 5 years in the summertime. He was, and then they'd have the lifeguards from Rehoboth would go to Ocean City they'd have a lifeguards ball in Ocean City and Rehoboth every year.
Oh.
So I do have a few books of the program books that I thought I'd
Oh,
give to
my
the. It shows a picture of all the guards. and
Oh,
stuff.
to the historical.
So I had 3 or 4 of those books I
Great.
thought I'd give to the Historical Society.
What do you remember people's attire being like, and what are the differences from what you remember in today?
You had to wear shirts on the board. You could never go on the boardwalk without a shirt, and you were not allowed bikinis on the beach. Of course, that all changed, but anybody in a bikini, I mean, I had seen the police once come down and escort a couple of people off the beach.
Oh my gosh.
The beach was very popular, and when you'd go to the beach, you'd always sit in your own group. I mean, I first went to Baltimore Avenue, and every day you'd go, you'd meet all your friends would be there with all their children, or before they were married, you'd still go down, you'd sit in a group, and it wasn't crowded like it is now. So, and you could have beach fires on the beach. We had a lot of, we'd go down in the evening and build fires.
Oh, okay.
You could also build fires around Lake Gerard, and when you would ice skate in the wintertime.
Oh,
But the beach was, everybody liked to go to the beach. They had a rope that went out so far, and with a big something that would, a buoy at the end of it, and you could, people that couldn't swim, where they'd hold onto this rope and go out.
Oh, okay. And was it just?
It went all the way out,
went
quite a
out?
ways, and you'd hang on to the rope.
Huh.
And there were a lot of fishing boats on the beach. Right on the main beach, they'd have like rowboats and fishing boats. Because when we were in high school, there were times when we would skip afternoons when it got real warm, and we'd go to the beach, and we'd hide between these boats. And lots of times the principal, he would walk down to the boardwalk, and he'd find us, and he said, "Girls, don't you think you should be at school?" And he was so nice about it, and we'd all get up and go back to school. But we were trying to get an early sunburn. The boardwalk was at night, you know, everybody went, and you dressed. I mean, my parents would go to the boardwalk and they would sit on the benches, but everyone was very well dressed. And I would never think of going down in the evening myself when I was without really dressing up. No one wore jeans or anything. You dressed quite well.
What would you say are the biggest differences as you think about it today?
Density.
Density.
That's the biggest, and my husband always said that. He said the thing that will be the most harmful to Rehoboth is the density. It's only a mile square, you know, and you get too many. And I think that's the greatest thing, because before it was just so delightful. I mean, it was enough people, but it was just not
packed.
Not packed and crowded, and you never had a problem. You know, the cars, there were no parking meters. And there were things to do in town. There was an Acme in town, right on the corner of Rehoboth Avenue and First Street.
And
the first one was, we called it an A&P. It's the same as Superfresh, but at that time it was called the A&P, Atlantic and Pacific. And next to that was the Acme. They were side by side.
So that would be in what is now the third block on.
No.
No,
it's the first.
The second block. Okay.
It's the first part of the second block, and the post office is where Grotto Pizza is now on Rehoboth Avenue. Did you know about that? The post office, it was an arcade, and at the very back part of the arcade was the post office. And on each side were shops like linen shops and Moore's drugstore. Bob Moore's father had a drugstore there. But that was the post office. It was right up, and that was the Ocean Block. And it had apartments up over top. People would sit out on the deck of their apartments and look down at the people in the. I can't think of anything else different on Main Street, but it's changed, but not a lot.
Yeah.
Some of the old buildings are still probably
Still there.
partial behind, you know, in some of those little shops. And the horse stables were out there, I guess.
Now, were they public? Could anybody?
Oh, yes,
rent?
and they were for the public.
Horse?
Anybody could go over there and
Oh,
ride,
okay.
rent the horse to ride. And there were bridle paths around the acres, and in the woods, you know, but there was plenty of places, I guess, for people to ride. But, yeah, there was, and of course, we're the Historical Society. That was the old Ice House.
Yeah.
I think McQuay had the grocery store across the street. I think was there when I came here. So it's, and Lingo's on the market that's on First Street. That's the oldest store in town.
The ice came.
Oh gosh, that was.
Do you remember
nice.
the old ice house and getting ice?
Oh, I remember the old Ice House. But here, when I moved here, it was a little different from where I came from. Harrington was even mostly farmers, horses and wagons and things of that sort. In Rehoboth, it wasn't quite it wasn't farmland like that. Now, of course, there was outside of town. I think. Now the road to Rehoboth Beach was a real small macadam or asphalt, and it was real bumpy and very narrow. And we'd go to Ocean City, and it was quite a drive. And then I can remember the inlet, the bridge, it collapsed in I think it was 1939.
Do you remember much about the storms that have occurred here?
Well, I was here through the '63 storm.
What was that like?
Oh, that was pretty bad. The whole boardwalk, everything was gone except there was just one house that weathered the storm, and that was on the boardwalk and Maryland Avenue. It was 4 apartments, and I think if you look at pictures, you'll still see that house. But everything else was on the boardwalk was destroyed. It didn't bother my house at all. But Lake Gerard filled, and a lot of things were floating in that from the Stuart Kingstons. A lot of their furniture was washed over in that. And the one big house on the corner of Lake Avenue in Surf, I used to think it was such a beautiful big home. I thought never would anything ever happen, and it toppled right over into the ocean. Well, that was a bad storm. I think the big one before that might have been 50 years before. There was a storm real bad years that took the pier and Horns and all that, but I
It's like
think that was 50.
1919 or was it something
Yeah, it
like
was
that?
like a 50-year span or something like that.
1913, something like that.
But the beach service, my brother-in-law does have that beach service now, and he's had it ever since he was like a teenager or very young. His father did a little bit, so he's been there a long time. I think, I'm trying to think how many years it has. But in the beginning, they would just stand the umbrellas up, and just rent them. They didn't have a concession and things like they do now. But
Mrs. Cole, I understand both you and your husband and your son have quite a history in politics in this area, and I was hoping if you might first tell us about yourself and your involvement on a committee or some of the committees in Rehoboth.
well, my husband was a commissioner in Rehoboth a number of years, 12 or 15 years, and then after that he was a commissioner over in Sussex County, and that was for another 12 years or so in that vicinity. And then when my husband died, and they appointed me to take his place. So I was over there for another almost a year. And when election rolled around, I didn't want to run for election, and so George, my son, decided he would try it. So anyway, they elected George won, and he's been there for 22 years since his father died. And so I guess it's gone on a long time that we've all been, someone said that it had been as long as anyone in the state had held one's area position in the same family. But anyway, it's a number of years, probably close to 40 or so.
And you have a unique distinction of being on the council.
And I was the only woman they've had so far.
Prior to that, you were active in the city of Rehoboth on.
Oh, well, John Hughes was their mayor, and at that time I was on the park commission, and I remembered that Rehoboth always had trees around the circle when I was growing up in Rehoboth, and I thought it was very much nicer to have trees around and not. So anyway, John they voted on giving the park commission $11,000, and we went ahead and got trees. And at that time, I went around and asked everybody in business around the circle if they objected, because some people thought that it would be, a lot of them would not want that in front of their business. So they all agreed, all the businesses signed a petition saying they did not mind trees. So we went ahead and had trees planted around the circle, so that's the beginning of the trees.
So there were no trees.
There were no trees around the circle at all when I did that. And then after that, I got very concerned about the children on school buses. Did you want me to tell you about
right.
that?
Yes.
In the 70s, my mother had seen a horrible accident where a little child was killed getting off the school bus. So at that time there were no stop arms or nothing. There was anything on the school bus for anyone to recognize. So I kept writing to Dover and asking them about, why they didn't put the stop arms on school buses, and I didn't get anywhere. So finally my husband said I was wasting my time, that if I wanted to do that I'd have to go and get a bill written and so forth. So I went back to Dover and had someone sponsor a bill for me, and we wrote this bill about having electrical stop arms, in the school bus stops. So anyway, it took me 3 years, and I went to Dover almost every day, and I talked to every legislator, because a lot of people that owned school buses didn't want to put the money out to put the stop arms. So with the help of a couple of nice gentlemen in Dover, we got the bill written, and they had to vote on it. So just about a month after my husband died, it was put on the floor, and the legislators all voted to do that unanimously. So then all the school buses got stop arms, and I got a real nice letter from I forget his name at the time right now, but he wrote me a nice letter saying that just proves, if you try hard enough and you work long enough, that one person can do something, because it was a lot of work. I wrote to all the states that had the stop arms. Some in Florida, they had 2 on the buses, one on the back and one on the front. And here we were without any. So now when a bus stops and that red stop arm comes out, it does make people aware coming for, either way, that they should stop. But before that, they didn't have anything. And I think since then, they've also put other safety features on school buses. But I was so happy, but it took me a long time.
Well, I'm about out of questions. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us? Anything I didn't cover? Any memory? Any thought? Any?
Well, all I can share this. I've lived in this house. We built it. I've been here 60 years. We built it in 1948, and I've lived here ever since. And I can say that my husband and I, my family, we just love Rehoboth. And my husband, he cared as much about it as I do. And it's a strong feeling, a strong attachment. And I think by living here so long, I really appreciate it. And I don't think there's any place better to live, from Maine to Florida.